I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast. This week I'm speaking to Victoria Leedham, Co-Curator and Gallery Manager of the Hannah Peschar Sculpture Garden. Back in 2014 I was studying for my garden design diploma at LCGD. And my lovely friend and fellow student Cindy Kirkland said she'd been to the Hannah Peschar Sculpture Garden and I must visit. Well, 5 years later I made it, and Cindy, you were right. It's magical and I wish I'd heeded your advice sooner. I visited the garden earlier this month and even in winter garb it was beautiful, set as it is in ancient woodland with streams running through it that pour down from Leith Hill in Surrey. The sculptures in the garden are diverse in character and look stunning within the location, each one fitting harmoniously into the backdrop of planting and landscape. Victoria is responsible for sourcing and placing sculpture in the garden alongside owner, garden designer Anthony Paul. We spoke about Victoria's work, about the sculpture garden, and also about how you can select and place sculptures in your own garden. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Could you tell me a little bit about what you've got going on at the garden here?
So we are... What's the best way to describe us? We are a sculpture garden, or an outdoor gallery, as people do say. The idea with this particular sculpture garden and what sets us apart from a lot of other sculpture parks is that the garden itself is just as important as the sculpture that's on display. So when we're curating each exhibition each year, everything is very carefully considered of where it's placed in the garden. It's not just a case of, oh, there's a gap, it'll fit in there. It's really, really thought about from everything of, you know, how the piece could be framed by trees or branches or a particular plant, how textures and colours might be picked up and mirrored, even how the sun's going to hit it at certain times of the day. It's all about creating harmony. And there's a word that we use because we haven't found a better one, which is synergy. So creating something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. So that's our main aim here. And my aim is not only to sell the beautiful artwork that we have on display here, because we are a commercial gallery, but also to show everyone, general people from all walks of life, that actually art is accessible. You don't have to go to a scary gallery up in London and all be hush-hush about it. You know, come here and see art in nature and just enjoy the beauty that it creates as a whole.
So how do you go about selecting pieces for the garden? Do artists approach you or do you source them, or is it a mixture?
A bit of both. Absolutely a bit of both. So over the winter, we're closed. Our exhibition doesn't open till April. And that's when we do most of the planning for the following year's exhibition. So we go to lots of shows, lots of art fairs, we go to other galleries, and sort of try and scout out new artists. Obviously, the wonders of the internet is quite good as well. If you're looking for something in particular, I can just have a bit of a Google and sort of search about. We do get a lot of submissions as well, which is brilliant because sometimes some of them, there is no way I would have ever found them otherwise if they hadn't approached us, which is really, really exciting. Sometimes, sadly, people do go a bit wrong, and the amount of beautiful paintings that I get sent images of, I'm like, yes, that's very, very nice, but you've had to type Sculpture Garden when you've emailed us, so the clue's in the name there, guys. Which is always I always feel really bad for people because being an artist is so hard, and you do just have to kind of just mail everyone that you possibly exactly it. And some of our artists as well. So we work with some of the same artists every year. And they know us really well. They know what we like and what we show and what we sell. And then if they encounter an artist that they think would be appropriate for here, then they'll introduce us, which is really nice as well. So it's all a bit of a free-for-all, really. We never know what we're going to find.
Well, that's interesting, because as you were talking then, I thought, I'm good at asking 14-part questions, by the way, but I think This is a two-parter.
Okay.
First of all, could you describe a little bit about the overall kind of feel of the garden? And then off the back of that, is there anything that you think wouldn't fit in the garden?
So that's a good question. So the garden itself is kind of a controlled wildness. So Anthony Paul, the owner, his landscaping style is quite gentle, really. He doesn't force plants to do what they don't want to do, and he always plants in big, bold groups. So it's quite a limited palette of plants. And this setting in particular is a woodland valley, an ancient woodland valley in Surrey. So we've got beautiful ancient Surrey woodland. We've got lush planting. And so it does... What makes it different from a sort of traditional country cottage garden is there's no sort of flowering borders. It's not contrived. It's a very natural feeling. And so the sculptures have to work within that. Saying that, we have a huge variety of sort of materials and themes that run through the garden, because often a contrast is just as good as kind of not merging with its environment, but sort of that relationship with this environment. We never kind of go too far either end of the scale. So we don't have anything that's really, really, really scary abstract, and we don't have anything that's like really, really, really figurative. Because those two extremes both seem to clash. We have tried them, but it's a little bit, it's too much. Where we are in Surrey, obviously we do have to cater a little bit to the Surrey and sort of the home county's taste. So we do have a lot of figurative and vaguely figurative pieces. So by that, I mean not just figures, but also sort of vaguely animals, that kind of thing. We have quite a lot of beautiful pieces that you would look at and think, oh, that's clearly meant to be a female torso, for example. We do have full figures around, but nothing too realistic. And we have pieces that are quite organic looking, so sort of interpretations of big seed pods and that kind of thing. And then we do have kind of more abstract pieces as well. We have had very abstract pieces before, but they weren't well received, quite frankly. We always ask people what they like and what they didn't like. And yeah, there was one series of work a few years ago where they were likened to concrete telegraph poles. And what else did they call? I can't remember what else they called them, but it wasn't particularly flattering. So we thought, maybe this isn't the right place to be exhibiting them. And of course, because we want our artists to do well, it's not just about us; it's about our artists. And if it's not the right place for them, then we probably won't show their work anymore, because what's the point? If they're not getting anything out of it, then it's not helping them.
No.
So we're always, it's a two-way relationship. You know, we're not just the big selfish gallery just going, I want this.
Give me concrete telegraph poles. So obviously you've got a lot of space here, and I think probably that becomes a blessing and a curse when you're trying to place pieces.
Yes.
For listeners at home, if they are thinking about placing a piece of sculpture in their garden, if we think about things like light and form and textural contrast and things like that, can you think of any really handy hints that might help people?
I think what intimidates people first and foremost is having the confidence to place something in their garden. The middle of the lawn is the most boring place that you can put something, and also the most impractical place that you can put something, because you've got to mow round it and stuff like that. So never do that. And don't be afraid to go big. Even if you've got a small garden, even if you've just got like a courtyard garden, often a big piece will be much more successful than a smaller piece that's just kind of poked in a corner. obviously, it is quite a commitment, and it is quite a scary thing if you've got a space that's sort of 30-foot square and you're wanting to put a 6-foot sculpture in the middle of it. Then yes, that is quite a statement. But sometimes bigger is better. It's a little bit difficult to sort of narrow that question down because my mind's kind of going crazy thinking about all the different options. The way I try and think about it, if I'm going to a client's house to place a sculpture that they've purchased, and then they know that they would like something else, they have no idea what, and they're not quite sure where to put it, there are two ways you can look at it. Either you can have a sculpture that is part of a journey of discovery, so you don't find it straight away, and as you're moving through your space, you're moving through your garden, then you encounter it and it's something quite intimate. The other option is making sure that you can see it from your house, which obviously a lot of people, if you're spending money on something, you do want to be able to enjoy it even if you're not out in your garden, which is completely understandable. But again, something that can risk being a little bit boring unless you've got somewhere where you can kind of nestle that in a corner, or where it's got a relationship to its surroundings.
Thinking about lighting as well is quite important with sculptures.
Yeah.
How key is it to get that right, or does it really depend on when you're going to be viewing it?
It really does depend. I mean, for example, here we don't have anything lit intentionally. There are pieces that are lit, but it's just because they happen to be placed near where there is lighting in the garden. There are all sorts of options, and thankfully nowadays there are a lot of very cheap, very efficient garden lightings that you can use, and we tend to, when we are advising people about lighting, we tend to go for something very, very, very subtle that can't really be seen during daytime, obviously, because you don't want that to kind of take away. The more kind of clashing elements there are, the more kind of convoluted it becomes. So we tend to go for uplighters, obviously, is the easiest option. Very, very low energy ones. You can even get surprisingly good little solar powered spotlights that I have a batch of, and I use those as like an experiment to see if you do actually want it lit. You can get them really cheaply from Amazon, or other places are available, and obviously they're not as strong as a proper electric light, but it gives you a good idea of what the pieces are actually going to look like at night when they're lit up, rather than having to commit to getting the electrician in to go and fit all the lighting straight away. It's quite a useful little tip, that one.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So how about natural lighting? Is that important?
Oh, natural lighting. Right? Yeah, definitely. You don't want to put a piece... It's difficult because sometimes there will be the most perfect spot for something, but if it's going to be in darkness most of the day, what's the point? For the most part, most materials do work well in a dull light as well, and it can be quite exciting seeing how they change in different lights and different weather as well. In particular, like stone, when that gets wet, you start to see all these beautiful colours coming through that you never really noticed on that beautiful June day when you first saw that sculpture. Pieces in particular that are great for light, obviously glass, anything slightly reflective. Glass is a fantastic material for outside. It really is. Even on today in February, I can see a sculpture that's probably about 150 metres down the drive, and I can see it glistening away in the sunshine. Glass you do have to be a little bit careful with, though, just because you shouldn't really put glass in direct sunlight because it can obviously have a slightly magnifying glass effect, and you don't want to set fire to your garden in the middle of July. It's not ideal. I've never heard of it happening, but one of the artists that we do work with, who has been making glass sculpture for about 30 odd years, I don't know whether he has experienced it himself, but he always reminds me to warn people when they're buying his work not to put it in direct sunlight, because
that's a good point.
Yeah,
you wouldn't want that, would you?
Not so much. And also it's we have like stainless steel and mirror polished stainless steel pieces, which are fabulous pieces, but you don't want to put them somewhere where you're going to end up blinding people as well, and it's really, really dazzling.
Get a glare just as you come across the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of swinging into your driveway, and then suddenly you can't see where you're going. So, yes, there are slight things like that to consider, but for the most part, it's just being, again, it's just being slightly mindful of where you are putting things. And if it is a very, very dark spot that you've got in mind for a sculpture, then you're going to need to think of something that's in a paler material. If you found a really interesting, dark, shady spot in your garden, popping a granite sculpture in there, you're never going to see it.
It might be a daft question, but how important is it to make sure that your sculpture will survive outdoors?
Oh, the most important thing. So when we're planning the next exhibition, and we found some sculpture, literally the first thing I look at or ask is, can it be outside all year round? For two reasons. I mean, obviously, us as a gallery, we don't want to sell something that is not suitable to be outside all year round, because our clients may not want to take it inside or cover it up, may not have the space to take it inside. We do sort of recommend that people maybe protect their sculptures a little bit in the winter, but at the end of the day, it has to be suitable to be outside all year round. And so I can kind of go through material by material, if you like.
Yeah, that would be really
okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Right. So there are materials which are kind of traditional outdoor materials. So, for example, let's start with bronze, because I think when people think of outdoor art, and particular sort of public art, you think of the big bronzes. Obviously, bronze is a fantastic one in terms of weathering, because it doesn't really. We and the artists kind of recommend that maybe you use a specialist wax on it once every year or so, just to protect the patina. Because the surface of bronzes, the coloration that's on there, it's not painted, it's actually a chemical process that they do when they're making the piece. So it is very expensive to repair. But for the most part, they weather beautifully, and they weather kind of uniformly. So bronze as a material is fantastic for outside. Other sort of traditional materials, obviously stone. Stone is a big one. But within that, you have soft stone and hard stone. So soft stone tends to be cheaper, but that is because it's easier to work with, because it's softer. So that means that it will weather much quicker.
Is that the stuff that it starts sort of looking a bit like soap that's dissolving?
Yes, yeah, it sort of, it basically starts to weather away. Remember learning about acid rain at school?
Yeah.
it's that exact thing. So some sort of soft limestones, that kind of thing, you have to be a bit mindful of, because especially if you are living somewhere where there's a harsher environment, so either down on the coast or sort of in the middle of a city where there's more pollution, then it is actually going to weather a lot quicker. Whereas something like Carrara marble, for example, which comes from Italy, that is the marble that Romans were using, and we still see their sort of beautiful statues today. So that is a lot harder. It's a lot harder material. So it is more expensive because it's harder to work with, but it weathers a lot better. Saying that, there are some marbles that are softer. So they can weather a little bit more. But generally, sort of your hards like your granite and your marble and stuff are harder. So they're kind of better for outside. Glass I've covered. Glass, you can sort of use your common sense really with glass. The chunkier it is, the better it's going to last outside, quite frankly. Stainless steel, great for outside. Mild steel obviously will eventually rust away, but generally it does last a pretty long time. Another good one that a lot of artists have started using recently is Corten steel, which viewers of Grand Designs might know, might recognise.
Yeah, and probably flower show visitors will be well aware of.
Absolutely. But that's a good one because, of course, the rust on the outside protects the steel, so it never eats away more than what's just on the surface. Aluminium's a good one. Copper, obviously copper does eventually kind of age, but the coloration on it is beautiful. Some slightly more modern material, well, not modern, ceramic. I forgot ceramic. Ceramic's a really, really important one, obviously. And ceramic, the possibilities are endless. So we love ceramics here because you can have pots or seats or figures or abstract forms or whatever you like.
And they don't crack.
So with ceramics, you have to ensure that it is high fired. So that means it's fired to 1200 degrees, which means that it should be frostproof. And generally that is with stoneware. So that's slightly grittier, the coarser type of clay. And that is chunky and solid and works well. We have had some sort of finer ceramics here. We've even had porcelain out here, which terrified me, if I'm honest. But it was beautiful, but we didn't have it here over the winter. And I kept saying to the makers, "Are you sure that porcelain is all right in the frost?" To be honest, I never really got an answer with that one. So I would always go stoneware, 1200 degrees, high fired, and you're a good one. The thing with ceramics are the most susceptible to sort of like freezing damage. So if you're looking at a ceramic piece for the garden, if it's got lots of little nooks and crannies and places where water can get caught, then that's going to be a risk, because when that freezes, that is going to shatter. So genuinely with any material, obviously bronze is fine, but any slightly softer material, even like a stone, even like marble, you've got to be careful. If it's got lots of deep grooves in it and it's going to hold water, then it could damage the surface of the work.
Didn't know that.
So it's always best to err on the side of caution. Mm-hmm. Modern materials, resin is a good one. So we have pieces that are found objects cast in resin. They weather beautifully. You just have to keep them clean. Just aesthetically, like if you leave it to get covered in muck, it's not going to eat it away or anything, but it's just not going to look very nice. We were talking about bronze a minute ago, and what often puts people off bronzes, not just the price, because obviously bronzes are more expensive because they are hugely labour intensive, but it's also the theft risk, which is so sad that we have to think about that now.
No.
But bronzes are the most at risk of theft for scrap. That's what's even worse, is it's not even like they're being stolen because, that's a beautiful thing. It's being stolen because I can melt that down and scrap it.
Oh, that's terrible.
Which is insane. But there are some clever solutions to that now. So there is bronze resin, which is literally bronze powder in resin. So from a distance, it looks like bronze. It's only when you get close and you tap it that you realise that it's not bronze. I've seen varying qualities of those, I have to say. I've seen ones that do just look like a big lump of plastic. But I've seen ones where I've genuinely been amazed that they are resin.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so that's a really, really useful thing to know, because they are so much cheaper than real bronzes. They're also more manageable because they're lighter, so you can move them around. They do require a little bit more care, just because the surface of them, they tend to be painted in some way, so they do need to be waxed more and kind of wrapped up for the winter sometimes and that kind of thing. But that's a fantastic alternative. And a lot of artists now are not only doing their work in bronze editions, but they're also doing them in bronze resin editions, because obviously there are the sort of the people that love bronze, and it's bronze or nothing, which is great. But there is that alternative as well. Interestingly, I went to visit an artist last week who is a ceramicist, and she was showing me some new pieces she's working on in her studio. And I thought she'd got some of hers cast in bronze. And it wasn't. It was just a really amazing glaze on her ceramics.
That's cool.
And so I was almost having the same conversation with her, where I was like, this is a really exciting alternative that people could have. Because, again, there's not the sort of the theft risk of that. But it just looked absolutely stunning. I couldn't believe it.
That's cool.
It was sort of a revelation.
Yeah. And how about acrylic? Does that weather okay?
Acrylic can decay quite badly. It tends to get quite brittle when it's in the sun.
Does it get a bit cloudy as well?
It can do, yeah. So I'd sort of, it really depends on how it's done, really. Because I think I've seen some sort of acrylic and perspex sculptures which did look really, really cool, but they, like you say, they went cloudy. They sort of get that splintery, spidery cracking as well, which is a shame.
Is there anything that you would worry about, not in terms of it getting damaged, but in terms of the effect that it might have, say, on plants or wildlife? I'm thinking particularly mirrors.
Yeah,
really.
Of course. I mean, always, if the piece is finished with something, always check that that's a suitable. It's not going to leach into the environment. So we have a lot of carved wood here. I forgot that in my list of things, but none of them are treated as such. They're all either just oiled, or we have one wood carver who scorches all his work, which aesthetically looks beautiful, but also acts as sort of a preservative, which is fantastic. And obviously, that's not going to have any problems on the environment. So we have had a couple of pieces that our resident ducks have demolished. They are quite clumsy, and we have a lot of them. Like in the summer, there's probably like 50, 60 ducks here, because it's a very nice place to live, quite frankly, and they get dinner every day. But they have, none of the ducks have ever been hurt. I very hasten to bet all the ducks are fine. We have had one piece that an artist was building, and a duck flew into it, and I was sat at my desk, which used to be that one over there, and I just heard this massive bang and a tinkling sound, and I looked out the window, and this sculpture was just in a million pieces with the duck looking very confused in the middle of it.
Oh no!
So it's not putting something kind of semi see-through somewhere where birds would normally fly through, for example. That kind of thing. Nothing too kind of netty, again, in places where birds or animals are going to go through. And just being really mindful of what goes on in your space, in your garden. And if nature wants to take back that area or that sculpture, you kind of have to let them a little bit. So a couple of years ago, we had a sculpture that was ceramics. It was a big hoop that you could walk through, and on this hoop were big ceramic balls threaded all the way around, so it sort of looked like a giant bracelet. It was amazing. And a bird started nesting in one of them, which was fine, and we let her get on with it. And then at the end of the year, when the artist came and picked their work up, we because birds do, once they've found somewhere nice to nest, often they'll come back every year. So the artist very kindly left us this section that had the bird's nest in it.
Oh, wow.
And it's still kind of wedged in a tree over there because, obviously the artist was a little bit miffed, but you can't argue with a mummy bird.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. So that's a bit like what you've done with the gunnerer, isn't it? You've put the sculpture in the sort of middle of it and you let it come up through it.
Absolutely. It's the whole thing with sculpture outside is this relationship with nature. And sometimes nature does want to take it back a bit. But that just kind of makes the relationship even stronger. And sometimes it even adds a little bit of humour to it as well. And quite frankly, there's not enough humour in this world. So we've put a sculpture in the mother gunnerer plant to draw people's attention to the fact that she is such an amazing giant plant who has mothered all the other plants in the garden. It does have to move. The sculpture does have to move a little bit as the plant is kind of growing up each year. Sometimes it ends up at a little bit of a jaunty angle.
The gunner's like, get out of it.
No, I want this bit. Okay, all right.
You must sometimes go to, I don't know, maybe more city locations and see sculptures in the middle of a courtyard. And I bet there's a bit of you that looks at them and thinks, oh, that would be so much better if it had a garden around it.
A little bit, yeah. I'll be honest. But on the other hand, it's been quite interesting. So last year we were very lucky to place some sculptures from here in a London garden, right in the centre of London. And it was a landscaped garden, but it was still very formal. There was a lot of brick. There wasn't really much planting, certainly in a few areas. And we put one of our sculptures, which had been under a massive beech tree, properly nestled in the woodland. She really looked like she'd just grown from the roots of this tree. She was absolutely beautiful there. And we thought, nowhere is going to look as good as that. And then we put her in this courtyard garden and went, oh, that looks even better. How have we done that? It was really interesting. Yeah. Really, really interesting.
Wow. Maybe because of the contrast.
Yeah, I think that was the main thing, was that we'd never seen her like that before. And then suddenly this relationship with sort of the architecture and the brickwork and the sort of the right angles and things was really, really striking.
So I could talk to you forever, actually, because I bet you've got really great stories, and I might have to come back.
I mean, I can. If you want silly stories, we can definitely do silly stories.
Well, I guess to finish though, I should ask, if someone is thinking about putting sculpture in their garden or designing it into a garden, for example, what would be your maybe top tip or top couple of tips for them?
Well, I'm sure there will be some groans and eye rollings when I say this, but go to sculpture gardens and talk to the curators there, because we do know what we're doing and we're here to help. You know, we will come up with some things that you've never thought of. We can put you in touch with artists, we can arrange commissions, that kind of thing. And it's difficult. Oh, gosh, I keep ending up sounding like my mum. In this day and age, with the internet, obviously it's incredibly tempting just to go directly to the artists. But galleries are really important to be that go-between and to help you and iron out any problems and come up with solutions for things, and help you actually logistically work out how to get things in the garden, and we will be honest with you as well. And tell you whether something is going to work or something's not going to work. So that would be my biggest top tip. Cool. And don't be afraid, basically. Yeah, take risks. Life's too short.
Well, isn't that good advice for every aspect of gardening? Life is too short, so do what feels right for you, be brave and follow what makes you happy. We realised at the end of the interview that we'd had such an interesting chat, but kind of got sidetracked when talking about wood sculptures, and I expect this is something I'll cover in a later episode, but the main points according to Victoria are that, predictably, hardwood lasts longer than softwood. Softwoods are easier to work with, but they rot a lot faster. So oak is most often used, especially in the UK, due not only to its hardness, but also how evenly it grows. Other hardwoods for sculpture would include yew, birch and beech. And a wood that goes slightly against that rule is English redwood. It's fast growing but remarkably resistant compared to other coniferous trees. Plus, it is the most beautiful colour when oiled. It's also a lot lighter than, for example, oak, so it makes placement a lot easier. And the base size is something to consider. The larger the area sitting on the ground, the more vulnerable it is to rot. So obviously you don't want it to topple over, but if it does have a large base, it will need to be elevated in some way so that water can't pool around the bottom. At the sculpture garden, they place theirs on paving slabs, and some have small pieces of tile wedged underneath as well so that air can circulate. So I hope you found that useful. I learned an awful lot from Victoria, and I will definitely be back to the Hannah Peschar Sculpture Garden when it officially opens. And Victoria tells me it's particularly lovely in May. The garden opens again to visitors on the 3rd of April, and you can find links to the website in the show notes. So a very big thank you to Victoria for taking part in the interview, and thanks to you for listening. I'll catch you next Tuesday. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps, and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.